Hi, this is Dr. Michelle Robin with Small Changes, Big Shifts, Building Rhythm and Resilience. And I believe if you'll change one thing a month, one thing for the next 12 months, you'll change your life forever. Thanks for joining me on the journey. Hey, good afternoon. July 15th. We've officially been into COVID life, little c, not big C, for 4 months. How did that happen, Father Justice?
I don't know. It's been a whirlwind, hasn't it?
It has been a whirlwind, that's for sure. So to those of you following us today, this is Small Changes, Big Shifts, Building Rhythm and Resilience. And my guest today is not going to let you down. I put on Facebook that we're going to give you a dose of hope and a dose of love. So let's get started with contagious enthusiasm for leadership and innovation and passion for entrepreneurship. Father Justin Mathews is a Kansas City native with 20 years experience developing and executing successful strategies for social, mission-driven, for-profit, and not-for-profit organizations. Father Justin serves as the Executive Director of Reconciliation Services, known as RS, a growing nonprofit located at 31st and Troost. And I actually got to take a tour because of my friend Karen Zisi. She connected us when you started, before you opened up Thelmas Kitchen.
Yep.
And I was actually going to be having lunch there with my friend, Dr. Michelle Kylo, right after COVID hit. So I've not been there since you got it done. I was there in the beginning stages. So your mission there is to cultivate a community seeking reconciliation to transform truths from a dividing line into a gathering place and reveal the strength of it all. Who would have known that we would be in this COVID time, as well as Black Lives Matter, at the same time that you're trying to transform 31st and Troost. So thanks for joining me on Small Changes, Big Shifts today.
Yeah, it's really, really an honor to be with you, and I appreciate the opportunity to share and to get to know your audience and you better.
Well, let's dive in a little bit. So what's your personal story? And go back to maybe in your younger years.
Sure. So I grew up in Kansas City and lived my whole life here until I went to college. And when I went to college, I went to Belmont University, and a lot of people don't know, I actually was an audio engineering and business double major, and was a musician. And I was singer-songwriter and signed to a small production deal in Nashville, and sort of a has-been who never was. But when I was graduating school, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. And so I ended up taking what I thought would be a short little stopover job, a quick pit stop right after college. And I went to work in the development department of the Nashville Rescue Mission. And, just my heart got captured. And I learned that you can actually combine the best of business, faith, and philanthropy to do social good. And from there, I spent the last 20 years in nonprofit leadership and work both in church settings, because I'm an Orthodox Christian priest, as well as a husband and a father of 3 teenage boys. But I've spent a lot of time in entrepreneurship as well, both in the business sector as well as in the nonprofit sector. So I moved back to Kansas City in 2008 when I helped to found and launch a national nonprofit that's still in existence called Focus North America. And it was sort of like Catholic Charities for the Orthodox Christian churches domestically. And then after 3 years of getting that up and off the ground, I was here and volunteering every week at Reconciliation Services when I wasn't traveling. And my wife, when we had little ones that you could fit in little backpacks on your back, we used to come down and serve meals at Reconciliation Services and volunteer. And as we got deeper and deeper into the community, we felt a call to move east of Troost. And so we raised our kids for about 7.5 years on Forest Avenue east of Troost. And in 2013, when the founder, Father Alexi, retired after his wife Thelma, or Mother Michaela, that's how I knew her. When Thelma passed away in 2013 and Father Alexi went on sabbatical and eventually retired, I was really honored to get to try to fill his massive shoes here on Troost. And since then, I've been laboring with an incredible team of social workers and therapists and volunteers and grant makers, donors, and anyone else who wanted to help to try to build reconciliation services into what it is today and what we hope it'll be tomorrow.
So talk about that transition from where you were at. Let's see, where you've come from, where you're at, and where you're going.
So each transition, obviously, you know, when we journey through life, it sort of unfurls on itself like a really beautiful flower in the spring, kind of one petal at a time. And it's hard to know what it's going to look like. And that's still happening, of course. But for me, along the way, every time that the page turned, what I realized was that harnessing the best of business, faith, and philanthropy in order to do social good, which I call social venturing. That's my definition of what social entrepreneurship or social venturing is. That became my life passion, to figure out how to move from each season in my life to the next, trying to be more authentic to who I am and who I was created to be, while at the same time trying to lead with greater social impact sustainably. And so, you know, there's some big moments along the way, not the least of which is getting married to a wonderful, wonderful partner in life who actually works with me here and is a key member of the leadership team at Reconciliation Services. And then having 3 kids. And I never really realized what a selfish human being I really was until I started having kids and realized that I can't sleep in as late as I want, and raising kids is hard. So those are some moments along the way. But lastly, I'd say that, you know, at every turn, trying to figure out how to integrate all of your past and your present together to become more and more authentically yourself, and to lead the way that you were meant to. That's hard work, but it's fun work. It's entrepreneurial work, and it's life-giving and healing work for you, which is where it needs to begin.
Well, we could take what you shared so many ways. I'm going to start with, we're celebrating you and the work you and your team are doing at Reconciliation Services, as well as Thelmas Kitchen, which if people have not had a chance to get there. Are you guys open right now? You are serving box lunches or something?
Yeah, so we'll be opening for box lunches very soon. We've been open during the COVID period as much as we can. In fact, for the first 45 to 65 days, I'd have to look at a calendar, we actually served over 10,000 meals out the front door safely, masks and tables to make sure we had social distancing. We've tried opening up the restaurant. It's very, very difficult. And of course, you know, most people aren't really ready to venture out again. So what we're getting ready to launch very soon in the middle of August is actually called Thelmas Kitchen Box Lunch. And it's a social venture nonprofit box lunch company or organization where every dollar that's donated and every box that's sold is going to go to fuel the work around social, mental health, and economic community building that we're doing to achieve reconciliation in Kansas City and here on Truce. So I'm really excited about that. There is significant hunger and significant food insecurity. We're not a soup kitchen. We very intentionally carved out this space where we're really trying to bring affordable food access to the working poor, the transitionally homeless. So you can think about full-fledged restaurants and soup kitchens, and we're kind of threading that needle in the middle so that all ships can rise together.
Once again, we're celebrating you, and I'm kind of a word nerd. Tell me, what does the word reconciliation actually mean to you? And I did not look it up in the dictionary before this call, so I'm curious.
Yeah, well, that's a word that means a lot of things to a lot of people. You know, to me, I'll start with, obviously I'm wearing a collar, so I'm going to speak from my tradition as an Orthodox Christian priest, and those that are listening may be from very different traditions. But in my tradition, the idea of reconciliation starts with the idea that I, as a human being, because of my sin, am separated from God. And as one being separated, I need to be reconciled. And so for me, that happens in my relationship with God through Christ in the Holy Spirit and in his church. And as that happens, the second thing that I've got to do is really go and wrestle with my stuff. And so you've probably heard of confession before. It's a little different than you might see in the movies. But for us in the Orthodox Christian tradition, confession is called the sacrament or the mystery of reconciliation. And that's where I get to the heart of things and begin to work on my own sin, my own prejudice, my own bias, my own issues, my own flaws, and I am reconciled to the truth and to what I believe in. And to my brothers and sisters who I live life with, and even those that I don't know, because so often our actions affect people widely. We don't even know who they are, how that's happened. But then from there, kind of moving on from my personal perspective and tradition, we take that very foundation of both kind of a spiritual, a personal, and a communal reconciliation, and we extend that into our work. Now, at Reconciliation Services, we don't proselytize. We're what I would call faith-inspired. We're not a work of any particular church, although we were founded by an Orthodox Christian community. And those principles, that theology of personhood, and that idea of, for example, racial discrimination and racism as a sin, as a heresy, though the strong stance that we take on those things influences the way that we move and walk and talk and try to live out our mission as an organization. So while we're not proselytizing in our work, those core values, those values of dignity and community and advocacy that stem from that spiritual perspective inform the work that we do to try to create reconciliation. So look, in the simplest, it's taking two people, two communities, two hearts that are divided, and finding a way to extract the precious from the worthless, try to find a way through repentance and through listening and changing of heart to find healing that we both need in order to, once again, be able to walk together in the best way possible according to your strength. Now, that plays itself out, Michelle, in very tactical ways. That was a big kind of aspirational answer, and I'm happy at some point to talk about how we live that out. But that's what reconciliation means to me. It starts with my own heart and moves on to my relationship with my brothers and sisters in the world.
Well, you had me at the word separated. You know, because you think about what's happening now, people have been forced into some form of separation right now due to social distancing. In some cases, for people, it's isolation. And then you look at everything that's been going on for the last, who knows, 400 or 500 years with racism. And we've been separated. And I love when you said we got to heal our own stuff, because I really believe once you heal yourself and fall in love with the way that our Creator intended us to be, whatever our listeners call that, let's say God, and how do we come closer to that connection of who we are? And then I can see you and I can see you just as another human being, and not looking at all the outside stuff. So like I said, you had me at separated there, and thank you for sharing that. Once again, we talk about 4 words on this show: celebrate. Okay, I want to talk about guidance. There's no doubt in my mind, and probably in your mind, that we're broken right now. Many people feel broken. Many companies feel broken. Many communities feel broken. And the world at some level feels broken. What kind of guidance can you give us to provide some hope to our listeners today of things they could do in this moment to feel more connected and less separated?
Yeah, there are many ways to achieve that goal. And for each person, it's going to be highly contextualized and very personalized. But for me, I've definitely felt the sense of separation. There is a cloud, a depression, a darkness that really creeps up on me. And I'm sure many of the listeners have felt the same way. It's a spiritual thing, but it's also an emotional, chemical, physical reality. And that reinforces the fact that we are both psychosomatic beings. We're spiritual, we're physical, we're intellectual beings. And if you neglect any one of those aspects of our personhood, then we're not really able to achieve that balance, that peace that we all so desperately need in order to be healthy mentally and otherwise. And so for me, there's a lot of ways that I've tried to personally and communally come back to that balance. First of all, I find it really important to exercise, and I'm not a guy who likes to run. I like to run when I'm chased. But, for me, that has become a practice where I am working stuff out. And there was a situation in my life that got very difficult on a personal level, and I found myself just running. And I felt like Forrest Gump, like just all of a sudden running. And that became something that was healing for me. And so I think you've got to address the physical side, whether that's walking or running or some form of physical activity. Also physically, we've got to get proximal with people. We have to do that safely. But look, we can't, there's that great old Thomas Merton book, No Man is an Island. We aren't meant to live alone. We're meant for community. We are interpersonal beings and we need each other. And a lot of us like to think we have this kind of delusion that we exist independently. And there's that kind of American ideal of rugged individualism, but that's a myth. It's actually not true. And it doesn't play itself out when you really break that down. So I've been trying to figure out, okay, who am I sheltering in place with beside my family? And how can I be mindful to check in on people who might not otherwise have anybody checking in on them? I'll just give a quick example. There's a gentleman that I work with who yesterday, as I was sort of walking around and talking to our team, just checking in with them, he was really struggling with depression. And he said, look, the group that I attend is not working, isn't meeting. We don't even do Zoom meetings. I feel really isolated because I'm behind plexiglass and masks and I can't see people's faces. And then, his kids are grown and he's not married and he lives alone. He says, I go home to an apartment by myself. And he said, man, I just feel alone. And so, that was a reminder to me that I need to be intentional, especially as a leader, to make space in my schedule and in my time to be intentional about being proximal the best that I can and being personal. So, those are some pieces of advice. And then that's on the physical side and on the emotional side. And then spiritually, look, if there's ever been a time where we need to learn something, the one thing that being alone and silence and distance can teach you is that there's this rumbling inner emotional world that's always present, but that we don't listen to a lot. And especially if you're kind of a raging extrovert like me, I really feel that we have something as Americans right now in particular that we can learn through solitude, learn to be with our thoughts, because our thoughts determine our lives and our behaviors. So I've had to practice being okay with a little more solitude. First of all, just in my office where I'm sitting right now, it just doesn't have the same hustle and bustle with people working virtually and some here. And but then even at home, and finding a place where I can pray and sit quietly and just listen. That's been important for me during this time. And it's one of those gifts that I think we're being given right now during this pandemic.
Well, you may not know this, but I talk about a message called the Quadrants of Wellbeing. We focus on 4 areas: mechanical, chemical, energetical, psycho-spiritual, much like running a business at your entrepreneurial, operations, marketing, finance, leadership. And I believe after 30 plus years in this space is that we have to have all 4 of those wheels turning for us to move through life with harmony, and use the word peace, grace, right, harmony, whatever word you want to use. So you did a great job catching those. You talked about moving. That's important. We talk about posture. How do you have the right sleep posture? Can you be looking at your phone like this instead of like this, creating a lot of neck tension? People are working in workspaces that are creating more drama and trauma. And then we also talk about, I think checking in is important. It's interesting, Father Justin, when I'm feeling disconnected from myself, or I'm feeling anxious, I go to reaching out to people, and the way I reach out is by the phone. And so those of you that are in my life know that it's not a surprise for me to just call you out of the blue, because I'm also listening. And you talk about listening to that inner knowing, and all of a sudden somebody will be just not haunting, but they will just be sitting on my shoulder all day. That's what I call it. So next thing I know, you're sitting on my shoulder all day, and I'm like, okay, you will not leave my shoulder until I call you and check in on you. And somebody like, oh my gosh, how'd you know to call? I'm like, well, you sat on my shoulder all day. And if I don't call you, I'm not gonna be able to sleep tonight.
Yeah. Yeah. That quadrant that you talk about is very important. And there's lots of different ways to talk about it. I like the way that you did. And one of the things I want to point out is, of course, we serve at Reconciliation Services over 5,000 clients a year. 99% of them are below the federal poverty level. That means if you're a family of four, you're living on less than $25,000 a year. 60% of our folks have witnessed regularly violence throughout their lives. And the level of trauma and toxic stress is over the top for our folks in our social and trauma therapy programs. And they don't have people speaking these truths into their life. I learned these things through great mentors and great coaches, not unlike you, and the voice that you provide for your friends and your colleagues and your patients. And it's so important to stop and remember that we have to model these things. You might be the only person in somebody's life who's actually teaching these things. And it doesn't have to be, super spiritual and weird and out there. It's actually just being human and beginning to ground yourself in some sense of humanity and some sense of authentic personhood. But that's something that's taught and caught. It's difficult to just wake up as a child and get it. And it takes a lot of work, especially if you live with toxic stress and trauma, to be able to get there. So I appreciate the way that you teach that quadrant. I think it's really important for all of us.
Well, I want to repeat in case people glazed over what you just said. It's taught and caught. Taught and caught. So how do we teach this way of life? So if you're listening to the show today, I would love for you to consider sharing what you're learning in the show notes. If you have questions, now's a great time to ask, and Eleanor will get them to Father Justin and myself. And also too, what can you share? And we'll wrap up the show with what's your medicine. I'm not going to jump to there because I've got lots more questions for you. I just want to, once again, you said move, check in, and listen. And so everybody can hear differently. So now that you've done tons of counseling and coaching with people through the years, what are different ways people listen?
Well, I think that listening begins with being quiet. We oftentimes think we're listening, and I know that's a cliche, this idea of active listening that people have heard. But look, if there's one thing that we've got to start doing in order to bring about healing, and in particular in the area of racial and economic reconciliation, we have got to start listening to people who are outside of our normal political sphere, our normal work sphere. We've got to be able to sit with things that make us uncomfortable. We've got to get comfortable with the uncomfortable. And that takes, first of all, listening. And it's so important to hear the family stories. I'm just going to give a quick example for your audience that's in Kansas City. And if you're not in Kansas City, let me give context. So Kansas City, a number of years ago, was bisected by a highway called Highway 71. And Highway 71 basically took up 4 blocks that were in what was then the segregated Black community. And it went through eminent domain, and it took 20 years. There was a lot of court battle, but eventually they succeeded. And while the progress was good, maybe for the economics of the city, it's not lost on any of us that went through the area of the city that it went through, and not through the white areas of the community or the wealthy areas of the community. So, what ended up happening was that there were 4 blocks of homes primarily owned by Black families that were torn down. Now that just kind of seems academic, and I'd listened to that story before, kind of politically and otherwise, but it was not until I spoke with one of my board members who is an African-American woman who grew up in Kansas City, and she said, "Oh, my mom and dad owned a house and they were moved forcibly. And I remember growing up in that house that my daddy built and that my parents spent years investing in. And when we lost it, there was just this huge hole, not just economically, but psychologically and emotionally." And when I heard that story from her, I began to understand the lived experience of people who had gone through the trauma of supplanting 4 blocks from 95th Street all the way to downtown. I mean, talk about 95 blocks and 4 blocks wide. That's a lot of people. And look, I think what I'm trying to say about beginning with listening is critical. We've got so much talking and so much polarization right now, but we need each other. You don't have to end up agreeing with the person on the other side of the conversation, but you do need to hear them. I mean, even the most basic instructions on a child's, math exam. I remember I used to get math problems wrong all the time. Why? Because I wouldn't listen to the teacher and I wouldn't read the instructions. I'd look at the problem and I go, I know how to solve that problem. I wouldn't show my work. I'd get it wrong. I'd do it wrong. Why? I had to learn, and it took me going to tutoring to learn this. I wasn't listening. And so I can see a problem. I can even bring a solution to a problem. Maybe I even get the right answer. But if I haven't listened, I may not get it right anyway. And so, look, when we're talking about racial and economic reconciliation, this is the beginning point. Listening and then moving to acknowledging. And those two first steps I would submit to you are the beginning of any of our healing. Listening to our body, listening to our family, listening to those outside of our leadership lane. That's the essential work that we miss oftentimes today.
I do a corporate talk called Listening. Listen, your body's always talking. Are you listening? Your body's always talking. Are you listening? And so I'm glad you brought up the body part of it, because it's so true with what you eat. It's the obvious what you eat, whether you get enough sleep, whether you're moving, but it also is true around the stuff you're watching, the people you're hanging out with, the conversations that you're having or maybe not having. And so I'm reading the book White Fragility right now, and it is uncomfortable to think about how I've had my head in the sand about what my brothers and sisters have been through. And so how do you listen more? And so you talked about dialing in and listening to your inner knowing, your spirit, God, and that helps you connection. What are some tools? Because some people, they sit and, and they try to be quiet, and I have to tell you, I have to work at this. I sit and try to be quiet, and then I'm thinking about that project and this project and that project. And I struggled to really come into my heart. And I've been at this a long time. So if you've not practiced it, much like yourself, then it's a little bit more difficult than just say, you should listen. Well, okay, well, I'm trying. Give our listeners some tools, how to listen.
Yeah, and let me give a caveat. I'm not sure that I'm the best listener either, and I'm not sure that I should be held up as an example. You'd have to talk to my wife and children about that one. But, I strive to do that, and I've been intentional to try to learn to do that, and I've had good mentors. I want to tell you about two frameworks that are in the new e-course, The Social Leader, that I'm about to launch in the next 3 or 4 weeks, and it'll be on our website. But these two frameworks are this. One is called the Integrated Priorities Framework, and it begins with listening. And it's all about how do we move from charity to integrated priority? And how do we move, another way to say it would be, how do we move from kind of an aspirational thinking to actually integrating practices and then operationalizing them in our life? And there's really a 4-step process that I don't have time to go into here, but it suffices to say it begins with listening. And one of those practices is really writing and journaling. Or some people, I found it helpful just to actually use audio, like I'll pull up an audio note and just record. And I mentioned in a conversation earlier about Otter, Otter, and it's this kind of free audio transcription program. And I use it to journal for myself. So that kind of writing, speaking, self-reflection is where we begin when we want to move from aspirational to operational, from charitable intentions to integrated priorities. The second thing that I talk about in this e-course, The Social Leader Essentials, is the idea of a thought reflection framework. And it's a 2-step framework that I teach that gives people the ability to reflect on their biases, to reflect on their thoughts, to write them down. And then there's a series of about 7 really piercing questions that I invite people to actually journal on for each of the key thoughts that they write down through this framework. And when we do these things, what we're really doing is developing an inner thought life. And that interior life is not, again, it's not something that we highly value in our culture. Other cultures actually really valued that kind of inner thought life and wrestling with philosophy and wrestling with big questions, we talk all the time about, life being lived by tweets and posts and sound bites, but especially if there are leaders out there, or especially if there are people listening who are wanting to find that deep healing from maybe traumas that you've undergone, you have to begin by revealing your strength. And that takes revealing those thought patterns that hold you back from that. And that act of writing and reflecting and cultivating an interior life is the essential starting point. So that's the practice that I teach, and that's the practice that I try to live into myself. And I fail every day, but that's okay. You fall and you get up again. And if you just keep doing that, you can't fail as long as you keep trying. I
love this saying, you've got to reveal it to heal it.
Mm-hmm.
We've got to reveal it to heal it.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned a couple times in there, and I will make sure this is in the show notes, the social leader. And you have a program, an e-course called the Social Leader, and you can find it at thesocialleader.org, which will also be in the show notes. Connecting with what you're doing over at Thelmas Kitchen, we'll also put that in the show notes. You've got a website, rs3101.org. What other ways can people connect with you? You got a podcast as well?
Yes. Yeah. So wherever you get podcasts, both live on Facebook, live on Twitter, live on YouTube every Tuesday around 12:30, but then archived on the website, Reconciliation Services website, as well as Spotify, iTunes, and wherever you get podcasts. The Social Leader is a weekly podcast where I engage with social leaders, people who I think are integrating those social priorities and trying to lead with greater social impact in order to change the world. That's a great resource. There's a lot of knowledge that's dropped by the guests, and we interview people from all different walks of life, from business, faith, and philanthropy, but each of them is teaching us how to lead with greater social impact. And then another way to engage is to get involved in the work of reconciliation. Take the things that we're talking about today and implement them in your life. Secondly, make a donation. Look, this work doesn't work without people getting meaningfully involved. And right now, volunteering, like in Thelmas Kitchen, like we normally do, isn't possible because of COVID, because we're trying to really prioritize the safety of our staff, our neighbors, and our clients. But the reality is, there is going to come a time where we're going to emerge from this. We're going to be stronger as a result of it. And you have the opportunity right now, from the safety of your home, to get meaningfully involved in the work of racial and economic reconciliation. Whether you want to support the mental health work that we're doing, we give free evidence-based, cutting-edge trauma therapy to low-income community members. Particularly, we reach out about 76% of our clients are African American. So we're really trying to address that community trauma, and more than half of our staff don't look like me. And if you don't have money to give, you literally can help us by just sharing. If you see us posting something on Facebook or Instagram or LinkedIn, share it out. Tell your friends, because the more we share our desire to be meaningfully engaged in the work of reconciliation, the larger the story gets. We don't need this to fade away with another news cycle. This is an old story, and it's long past time that we have like our own Truth and Reconciliation Commission in the United States, and it begins with our own heart. And so that's some ways that folks can get involved. You can find out a lot more ways to support us at rs3101.org.
So in this case, sharing is caring.
Yeah, it's a good pithy statement, but yeah, I mean, in this case, a lot of what we struggle with is, look, we're not Goodwill. We don't have a name like Salvation Army. We've only been around 30 years. But the work that we're doing and the problem that we're addressing is a long one. And I think the work that's happening here is a model for what can happen all across the country. And so if you help us to scale and grow and sustain right now during COVID, when we desperately need that assistance, and our neighbors who are unemployed and dealing with the trauma of the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd, look, those things don't go away. The trauma of poverty, the trauma of losing your job, and they're even proven studies. The trauma of being an African American, a person of color who watches somebody of your race or your family be murdered on TV and watching that over and over again, it creates a sustained community trauma that needs healing as well. There are very few tangible ways to participate in that, and Reconciliation Services offers a really powerful way that you can.
Well, a lot of our audience who listens knows I just feel this big old tingle, which to me is my spirit, God talking to me, just really resonating, and it's all the way up to my cheeks right now. And so I'm hearing you, I feel you. I want to take action. I'm trying to take as much action as I can. I know I can do better, especially if I get more clarity. And so for those of you listening today, if you don't know what to do and you say, you know what, I could donate $5, $500, $5,000, consider going to rs3101.org and sharing that. If you say, you know what, I can't do that, I'm trying to take care of myself, totally understand. Could you reach out to a friend that's maybe in isolation, that's single and they're struggling? And people feel separated on many levels right now. And we think about the Your Wellness Connection. When that came to me, 22 years ago, it was to really help people reconnect back to the essence of how that we are designed to be. We are innately designed to live a well life. And we're at a pivotal moment in time right now where we're going to shift. I personally believe we will shift forever the trajectory of the planet right now. On many levels. Father Justice, I've got a few more questions for you. I do want to give a plug out to my friends at Win for KC. We had Jessica Blueball on the show last week, and we talked about the triathlon that's coming up next weekend on the 25th. And if you'd like to join me, we'll put it in the show notes how you can do that. If you are having trouble paying for your entry fee, send me a direct message. I'll pay for your entry fee. I'd love for you to join me. Motion is lotion, as my air quotes yoga studio yoga teacher Lisa says. So Father Justice, I've got just a couple more questions for you. What has been the biggest gift you've gotten from quarantine life?
Yeah, and let me share one other thing, and I'll answer that question. If you don't have money, look, if you're in Kansas City and you need assistance, please, you can go on Reconciliation Services website, click on services. You can schedule an appointment with one of our case managers or one of our trauma therapists. If you are low income, you can't pay for it, we're here for you as well. And if you want to get more educated, there are scores of videos. And if you want to do some listening outside of your normal sphere, you can just go to rs3101.org, click on stories, and just start listening. There's a story about the 200-year history of truce that'll blow your mind. And if you aren't in Kansas City, these stories are still applicable because there's a truce in every North American city that exists. So your question again, now that I can get that off my heart, what was that?
Well, you're lucky I can remember it, because usually I don't remember it. But
I know, I just did that.
What gift have you gotten from quarantine life?
Oh, man. It's the gift that keeps on giving, doesn't it? I know a lot of people have said this, but the first 4 weeks in particular, I think I saw my almost 18-year-old more in that 4 weeks than I had in the 6 months prior. So that gift of just being with my family, and, we're in a very busy season of life, and all of us who have had the opportunity to spend more time with family and friends and those that we love, I think that's a huge gift. The other gift is the reminder. I talked to one of our neighbors who is a client, very low income, really struggling. I said, how are you doing, man, during COVID? And he said to me, you know what, this is like same old, same old. I live on the brink of surviving every day. So the idea of being isolated and struggling and not knowing where to turn and kind of feeling down, like this is what I live with every day. And I was reminded of their consistent struggle, but also our neighbors' strength and resiliency. And it was an important reminder for me. It was a gift during COVID to be able to really hear my neighbor say to me, look, what you're experiencing right now as you're alone and, working from home even, and all those things, you're building the empathy to be able to hear my story. And I think that's critical. think we're feeling things a little differently than we were at the beginning of February. That's a gift too.
That is a gift. Interesting. I'm going to hold it up to the camera. I have a little stick-em note that I'm called Pearls. I'm in the Hellsberg Entrepreneurial Mentoring Program. If you happen to be an entrepreneur listening to this show, we are actually getting ready to take a new class of mentees, and the deadline to apply is August 1st. I'd encourage you. I've been in the Hellsberg Mentoring Program. We call it HEMP for short since 2003, and it has been definitely a gift that has kept on giving. But I've written down some pearls, and the one that has been coming to me this week, as people are thinking about going back to school and everything, the one that keeps coming back to me, repeating over and over is, in this moment, am I okay? Because there's so much uncertainty. And what I'm certain about in this moment, as I'm having this conversation with you, I'm present, I'm blessed, I'm in this moment right now, I'm okay. And so I would encourage people to think about in this moment, and try not to get too far ahead of yourself, what tomorrow brings or the next 6 or 8 days, but how can you be okay in the moment? So thanks for sharing that. So I've got just 2 more questions for you. And I remind our listeners, we've had a fabulous conversation with Father Justin today. And I'm hearing you, Pam, that we need to have maybe we need to have a weekly tip, a weekly talk with Father Justin. It took us actually about 6 weeks to get this conversation scheduled. So a weekly tip may be tricky.
We could do something. We'll make it work.
Well, I hear you. If you want to dial into your own leadership, go to thesocialleader.org and learn about his program that's getting ready to be released. Okay, last 2 questions. Magic wand. You can change anything in the world. You had a magic wand. What would you do?
You know, that's a hard one. I read that in the email that you sent me ahead of time, and I've been scratching my head ever since then, because it's hard to say anything without sounding just super pithy and really trite. But if I had a magic wand, I would immediately want people to be able to feel what the person that you're standing in front of is feeling, because we just misunderstand each other all the time. Look, I've been married 21 years, and how many times in my relationship have I said something thinking that I was answering the question, and in reality, I had no idea what she was feeling and what she was asking. And since I couldn't feel that, and I wasn't perceptive enough to get that, I gave the wrong answer and even, did harm in the moment. And so if people could actually step into the rumbling emotional world of hidden experiences for all of those that we meet, so many of the things that we do would be shaped and molded in a way where more shared value would be created. And I think that would be the magic wand, because it's kind of at the root of everything for me. Remember, like there's this old saying in recovery, you gotta fix your stinking thinking. And so our thoughts determine our lives, and what we think other people are saying, what we think they're feeling, really determines how we speak, act, move, vote, talk. So that's the magic wand. Pretty aspirational, right? Still pretty pithy.
Maybe 5 or 10 people or 100 people or 1,000 people or 1 million people will say, hey, I can do that. I can start to dial in a little bit differently. I want to share a resource that I absolutely love. It's called the 5-Minute Journal. And I've shared it before, but you talk about writing. It's an app, and I have horrible penmanship, but I have good thoughts. And so the first question of the day is, what are you grateful for? And give a shout out to my friend MK Mueller. It's her birthday. She's 8th grade, and it's her birthday today. So, hey, MK, happy birthday to you. She's probably the gratitude queen that's written several books on it. But it asks, what are you grateful for? And then I like that question first thing in the morning, and I know people like it at night. And the second question, which is really probably as profound for me, is what am I going to do to make today great? Or what's going to make today great? And so that's really where your intention goes. And so I could put my intention to be really present with people today and to listen to their story and really dial into that. So wherever your intention goes is where your attention goes. And so as we create space to hear other people's stories. So I want to first of all, thank you so much for joining me on today's show. I really appreciate you joining me on Small Changes, Big Shifts, Building Rhythm and Resilience.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. And I'm excited to get to interact with your audience and with you in the future. And of course, if people want to comment online on Facebook or wherever you're watching this now, we'd be excited to visit with you and answer questions that you might have and connect you to resources if you're in need. So thank you again, Michelle.
You're welcome. Okay. I asked you this before. I gave you heads up on really 2 questions. I think I've covered maybe 3 questions that I sent you. I'm a word nerd. I love quotes. I actually made a new quote for the show today that I'll share in just a little bit. But what's your quote that's inspired you today?
Thanks for asking. This is a quote that actually, I have it on a card. And when we have new people that join our team and give a gift, I send them this because it is a powerful quote. And I'm going to read it to you. I have it memorized, but it's by Mother Maria of Paris. And she was a radical Orthodox Christian nun. She was a Russian emigre who, during the Bolshevik Revolution, after being mayor, back in the early 19-teens, which was pretty amazing. Mayor of a small town. She was a poet. She was a playwright. She was an artist. She moved to Paris and opened up a house of hospitality. And she said this in one of her writings. She said, "No amount of thought will ever result in any greater formulation than these 3 words: love one another. So long as it is love to the end and without exceptions." A lot of times we get that great Beatles song in our head and we talk about loving one another. But the qualifier that she gives there, she says, no greater formulation than love one another as long as it's love to the end, meaning self-sacrificial, maybe even of your own priorities, your own will, your own breath, in some cases, to the end and without exception. Really making room for everybody and recognizing that none of us have this perfectly figured out. And when we love like that, those 3 words, there's no greater formulation in the English language or in any language than that. That's my favorite quote.
Well, today I'm figuring out how to go live, and it's been a process. And I put in there hope and love. A dose of hope and love. And so it's not surprising to me that you had a quote about love. And so to all of you listening today, remember, sharing is caring. Reach out to your friends. If you feel compelled to share this show, great. Hey, my quote for the day is around hope. And I've been wrestling with what hope means. And I love acronyms. And so here's what my spirit came up with today. H. Heavenly moments. I wish for you today that you could have some heavenly moments, not only with those you love and care about, but with yourself. And then be open-hearted, that everybody you come across, that you're able to look at their soul to soul versus role to role. And so how can you be open to whatever message you need to receive so that you can help heal what's going on in our world right now? And then the P for patience. Be patient and give yourself some grace that maybe you're not getting it right today, but you know what, you're trying, and be patient with yourself and be patient with other people, because we don't know what battles they're fighting, just like Father Justin talked about with his neighbor. And then E, endurance. We've got to build some endurance. Where this is not a 2-week problem or a 3-week problem or even a 6-month problem. We are in the middle, and probably have been longer than we can even think about, in this whole change. So have some endurance. So hope, H for heavenly moments, stay open-hearted, be patient, and have some endurance. And the way you have endurance is by taking care of your mind, body, spirit. So once again, thanks for joining me on Small Changes, Big Shifts. Send you all extra love. Hey, and I'll chat with you soon. I sure appreciate you listening to Small Changes, Big Shifts. If you go to the website, smallchangesbigshifts.com, we'll have the show notes ready for you there. If this episode inspired you to make a small change that will lead to a big shift, please share with a friend. You can catch our episode on Apple, Google, Spotify, YouTube, and our website. And if you feel like it, please leave a rating or a comment. Be sure to subscribe so you can catch our episode next week. Blessings to you.